You know, plenty of the subjects in my Crash and Burn series have had more spectacular meltdowns or sunk to deeper depths of obscurity, but it's honestly difficult to think of anyone who's fallen quite so far as JJ Abrams, once hailed as the new Steven Spielberg, the king of big budget blockbusters, a writer, producer and director so powerful that he could literally bring back franchises from the dead. He wasn't just a golden boy, he was Hollywood royalty. Then in December of 2019, it all came crashing down in one of the most cataclysmic career implosions in the history of cinema. His crash and burn was as meteoric as his rise to fame, so join me once again for Crash and Burn, the JJ Abrams story. Jeffrey Jacob Abrams was born in New York in 1966, the son of TV producers Gerald Abrams and Carol Ann Abrams. So it's pretty safe to say he was exposed to the entertainment business from a very young age, and pretty soon began to show an interest in filmmaking himself. As a kid, he would write and direct amateur movies with his friends, using an old 8mm camera, mostly focused on science fiction and horror, with lots of gruesome deaths and over-the-top fight scenes. He even entered some of his films into local film festivals along with his friend Matt Reeves, and it's here that fate intervened in young JJ's life. See, he wasn't the only guy to start out making amateur movies on 8mm cameras. Steven Spielberg had done exactly the same thing a couple of decades earlier, and now in 1982 he was looking for someone to restore some of his old work that had been sitting in storage for like 20 years. That's when he happened across a news article about a pair of talented young filmmakers who were making a name for themselves by working in 8mm film. Kathleen Kennedy, who was Spielberg's not particularly talented coffee lady at the time, don't worry about her, I'm sure she won't amount to anything, suggested that they might be the ideal guys to restore his old footage for him. And well, when Steven fuck-mothering Spielberg calls you with a job offer, you thank your lucky stars and say yes. This chance meeting would spark a lifelong friendship between the two, where JJ began to see Spielberg as a kind of mentor figure to him and a role model for his own future career. Pretty soon he threw himself into the industry, and his first major gig was a screenwriter for the 1990 Jim Belushi comedy Taking Care of Business. That film wasn't exactly a big hit, pulling in weak reviews and failing to break even at the box office, but hey, it was a start I guess. A couple of minor producing and writing gigs followed throughout the 90s, the biggest of which was probably a script treatment for Michael Bay's Armageddon. And keep that name in mind because it'll be important later. Anyway, his big break came in 2001 when he co-created the TV show Alias, an espionage thriller about a young woman working as a double agent for the CIA. It was well received and it ran for 5 seasons, but JJ wasn't done there and soon co-created Lost in 2004, which would go on to become one of the most iconic TV shows of the decade, before falling apart with one of the most disappointing endings in TV history, but that's a whole other story. JJ by now was developing a winning habit of starting major projects with grand aspirations and huge potential, and then handing them off to other people to actually bring them home. Again, keep that idea in mind because it'll definitely be important later. Anyway, by this point JJ was rapidly climbing up the Hollywood ladder, and in 2006 he made his directing debut with Mission Impossible 3. The franchise was in a bit of a funk after Mission Impossible 2, and although JJ's movie didn't do as well at the box office, it was well received critically, and it laid the groundwork for more sequels, so it's generally seen as the movie that got the franchise back on track. Paramount were definitely happy with his work, and since he'd now developed a reputation for reinvigorating struggling franchises, they had another job for him. Star Trek by this point was a sprawling media franchise that had been running for decades and now covered TV, movies, games, books and God knows what else. The problem was, it was getting kind of tired and stale by the late 2000s. After milking the brand for half a century, Paramount were all out of ideas for what to do with it next. What they really needed was a fresh take, something younger, more action-packed and cool that would appeal to a whole new generation. Enter JJ, who partnered up with his buddy Alex Kurtzman you say that name? To deliver rebooted Star Trek in 2009. Whereas old Trek had been a franchise of ideas, science, philosophy, human potential and mature diplomacy, JJ's take was explosions, lens flare, cool spaceships, frantic running, yelling, lens flare and even more explosions. It was a style of writing and filmmaking that I once described as rapid-fire stupidity. The idea that you can get away with the most retarded writing imaginable if you just keep everything constantly moving, constantly bombarding the audience with more noise, more yelling, more running, and more lens flare. They get so overwhelmed by it all that they can't even stop and think about how none of it makes any sense. It was dumb, it was exploitative, and it turned Star Trek into generic sci-fi action slop, but holy shit was it successful. Star Trek was well and truly back, it was relevant and cool again, and with the 2013 sequel Into Darkness, JJ dared to ask the ultimate question. Hey, what if we just did Wrath of Khan all over again, except this time everyone's retarded? Genius! Into Darkness raked in even more money than its predecessor, but the cracks were beginning to show in Abrams' Trek. People were beginning to see it for the empty, creatively bankrupt rehash that it was, and so JJ followed his usual pattern of bailing the fuck out and letting someone else take the reins.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
Anyway, he had an appointment with destiny. Paramount weren't the only studio looking to reinvigorate a legacy franchise. Disney had just bought Lucasfilm from old George for a pretty hefty lump of change, and they were looking to kick off a whole new trilogy of Star Wars movies so they could start printing money again. Oh yeah, and remember that highly opinionated but slightly incompetent coffee lady who once recommended JJ to Steven Spielberg? Well, it turns out she was now in charge of Lucasfilm.
Fuck.
She remembered JJ and soon made him an offer. Ahoy hoy. Hey buddy, you know how you brought Star Trek back to life and made a shitload of money for Paramount? Well, any chance you could do the same for us? No problem, Kathy. And so, in 2015, the world was treated to The Force Awakens. All the JJ Abrams hallmarks were there for the world to see. The lens flare, the action, the running and the shouting, the nostalgia baiting, the rapid-fire stupidity. And the funny thing is, people lapped it up. Even Red Letter Media, the guys who made it fashionable to shit on Star Wars for like a decade, couldn't say enough good things about it.
I loved it. It was everything I hoped it would be.
You sure about that?
Bet you regret that one now, eh, Mike? The movie went on to make the GDP of a small African country at the box office. Star Wars was back and JJ was by now at the height of his powers, hailed as the new king of Hollywood. Yeah, he was basically serving up generic action slop and shameless nostalgia bait with a thin coating of Star Wars on top, but nobody seemed to notice or care. He just set up another massive franchise, laid the groundwork for a sequel, and now it was time to move on. But problems were afoot, dear viewer, and the seeds of JJ's downfall were already being sown. See, for reasons best known only to herself, everyone's favourite coffee lady had decided to hire a relatively unknown director named Rian Johnson for the sequel, The Last Jedi. If JJ was seen as a safe but slightly unimaginative pair of hands, then Rian was the exact opposite. A man who thrived on controversy and provocation, who wanted to take creative risks and subvert expectations. And well, he certainly fucking did, that's for sure. There's no easy way to put this. TLJ was a fucking calamity of biblical proportions. Not only did it provoke massive audience backlash, not only did it split the Star Wars fanbase so badly that it's never recovered, but it also introduced the dark spectre of identity politics and culture wars into every conversation about the franchise. After a strong opening weekend, the buzz soon died away, the box office cratered, and the movie ended up making barely half of Force Awakens total. There was no hiding it now, Star Wars was in trouble, big time. The coffee lady's gamble on Rian Johnson had backfired massively, so much so that her boss had to step in and take control. Hello? Hi JJ, it's Bob here. Listen, we're in a bit of a bind here, old buddy. Rian went full retard with Last Jedi and now we have to try and fix it. Any chance you could do us a solid and work that old JJ magic on the third movie? Well, I don't know, Bob. Perfect, see you Monday. Can't wait to hear your ideas. Bye! Hello? JJ was back on Star Wars, unwilling and unprepared, but back all the same. His task was a daunting one to say the least. Try to unfuck and undo the damage done by Rian Johnson without making it obvious he was doing it, or pissing off TLJ fans, reunite the fractured fanbase, and bring the sequel trilogy to a satisfying conclusion, all in the space of a single movie. This was going to require every ounce of creativity, imagination, and writing skill that he could bring to bear. The risks were terrifying, but the rewards would be immense. He'd go down in history as the guy who saved Star Wars not once, but twice. The trilogy, the franchise, his own career, it all depended on Rise of Skywalker.
Oh man. Oh God. Oh man.
Yeah, so that didn't happen. If possible, Rise of Skywalker would turn out to be an even bigger disaster than The Last Jedi, costing way more to make but earning hundreds of millions of dollars less at the box office, and getting absolutely savaged by critics in the process. It did succeed in uniting the fan base at least, just not in the way JJ had intended. His strategy of trying to please everyone with a combination of cheap nostalgia bait, simplistic fetch quest storytelling, and a tediously predictable final battle resulted in an end product that felt like it had been written by AI, told to take absolutely no risks whatsoever. Even the rapid fire stupidity wasn't working anymore. People were starting to see through the dumb as fuck writing and the single sentence explanations for the most wild plot events.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
The fallout from Rise of Skywalker was enormous. It was the final nail in the coffin of the sequel trilogy, and so far at least, the end of Star Wars at the movie theatres. From then on, the franchise would retreat to TV in the wake of this failure, where it's been slowly cannibalising itself into cultural irrelevance over the past 5 years. But for JJ, the repercussions were absolutely devastating. Almost overnight, he went from Spielberg's heir apparent to a modern-day Ed Wood, his name forever linked with the disaster of Rise of Skywalker. Star Wars had carried him to the very pinnacle of success, only to pull him down into the deepest valley of failure, and in the 6 years since this film came out, he hasn't written or directed a single movie. His list of unrealised projects is now longer than Hassan Piker's list of TOS violations, but unlike Hassan, I actually don't think that JJ's a bad guy. In fact, his only real shortcoming is having aspirations that far outstrip his abilities. He's a Michael Bay kind of filmmaker at heart, good at lightweight spectacle and fast-paced action, but hardly some deep-thinking artist with important stuff to say. The problem is, he desperately wanted to be seen as some visionary filmmaker, the next Steven Spielberg, the guy who would define the next generation of big-budget movie making. And well, much as I hate to say this, he just wasn't that guy. Will he ever recapture the magic and claw his way out of director's jail? Well, he's got one movie in the works at least. Ghostwriter, a fantasy film with a half-decent cast, so maybe there's a chance at redemption for him. And you know what? Maybe he deserves it. There probably is a world where he has a decent career as a mid-level action director. Sci-fi thrillers, epic war movies, maybe the occasional superhero flick. A guy who understands his limitations, plays to his strengths, and develops a good reputation for delivering competent, if slightly unspectacular end products. Right now though, he's more like a walking example of the Dunning-Kruger effect, and a cautionary tale about how you can only hide your shortcomings for so long before people finally figure out who and what you are. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.